The dust had barely settled. Joshua, their leader, was gone. The generation that witnessed miracles was fading, and a new one born in comfort was rising. They knew the stories but hadn't lived them. Without a strong leader, the people began to drift. They looked at the nations around them, envying their gods and rituals. A dangerous thought crept in. Maybe we can have both, our God and theirs. They forgot God's command to be set apart, to be a light to the nations. Instead, they blended in, building altars to Baal and Asherah, bowing to lifeless idols. They traded the living God for empty statues, a heartbreaking exchange. The land meant for peace became a place of peril. The nations they failed to drive out became their oppressors. God had warned them, "Turn away and your enemies will rule over you," not out of anger but love. He let them face consequences, hoping they'd return. The silence from heaven was a sign. The absence of a king left a vacuum. Into that vacuum crept chaos and confusion. The people had forgotten their first love. The land was restless, the people lost. They had everything, yet chose chains over freedom. God's heart broke for his people, longing for them to remember. But for now, Israel was a land without a king, and in that emptiness, darkness grew. Out of this spiritual fog, a painful pattern emerged. A cycle that defined Israel's story in Judges. It began with sin. Israel turned from God, chasing after idols. God, just and loving, allowed their enemies to oppress them. The Midianites, Philistines, Moabites, each took their turn. Israel suffered, enslaved in their own land. In desperation, they cried out to God. Every time God heard. Every time he sent a deliverer, a judge. These weren't kings, but rescuers for a moment in time. God empowered them to defeat Israel's enemies and bring peace. For a while, the land would rest. But soon the people forgot again. The cycle restarted. Sin, oppression, desperation, deliverance. It was a downward spiral, not just a circle. God's grace shone brightest in their darkest moments. He never turned a deaf ear to their cries, but the peace never lasted. Israel's heart kept wandering. The cycle was destined to repeat until something or someone could break it. Judges is the story of that unending circle and the longing for a true king. God's rescuers were never who you'd expect. Othniel, the first judge, was an ordinary man from a faithful family. God's Spirit empowered him, and he brought peace for 40 years. After Othniel, Israel fell again. This time, God chose Ehud, a left-handed man overlooked by most. Ehud's unique trait became his strength. He assassinated the enemy king and led Israel to victory. The land had peace for 80 years. God uses what the world sees as weakness. After Ehud, Israel turned away again. This time God chose Deborah, a woman prophetess and leader. She judged Israel from under a palm tree, offering wisdom and courage. When the enemy threatened, Deborah called Barak to lead the army. Barak hesitated, asking Deborah to go with him. She agreed, but warned the honor would go to a woman. God's power isn't limited by gender or status. Deborah's faith and leadership brought victory. God's heroes were unexpected, men and women, strong and weak. He saw potential where others saw limitations. In Judges, the unlikely become the instruments of deliverance. God's choices always surprise. Deborah's faith was unwavering. She delivered God's command to Barak, gather 10,000 men and face Sisera's iron chariots. Barak hesitated, wanting Deborah by his side. She agreed, but told him the victory's honor would go to a woman. In battle, God threw Sisera's army into panic. The mighty commander fled on foot. Sisera sought refuge in Jael's tent. She welcomed him, then drove a tent peg through his temple as he slept. Just as Deborah prophesied, the enemy fell by a woman's hand. Deborah and Barak sang a song of praise, celebrating God's victory. The land had peace for 40 years. Deborah's story proves God calls leaders from all walks of life. True courage is obeying God, no matter the odds. God's deliverance came through faith, not force. In a time of fear, Deborah was a mother for Israel. Her legacy was peace. After 40 years of peace, Israel fell again. The Midianites ravaged the land, leaving Israel hiding in caves. In desperation, they cried out to God. God sent an angel to Gideon, not on a battlefield, but hiding in a winepress, threshing wheat in secret. The angel called him Mighty Warrior. Gideon, full of doubt, questioned God's presence and power. God's answer was simple: "Go in the strength you have. Am I not sending you?" Gideon protested his weakness, but God promised, "I will be with you." It wasn't about Gideon's ability, but God's presence. God saw potential in Gideon's fear. He called the least to do the impossible. Gideon's journey would be from fear to faith. God's strength would shine through Gideon's weakness. The rescue would begin with a reluctant hero. Israel's hope rested on God's promise, not human power. In the winepress, faith was born. God was about to use the weakest to save the nation. The story of Gideon was just beginning. Gideon's faith was fragile. He asked God for signs, a fleece wet with dew, then dry while the ground was wet. God patiently answered, building Gideon's trust. When it was time for battle, Gideon gathered 32,000 men. God said, "Too many." He wanted Israel to know the victory was his. Gideon sent home the fearful. 22,000 left, still too many. God tested the rest at the water. Only 300 remained. 300 against an army as numerous as locusts. The odds were impossible by human standards, but that was the point. God wanted Israel to see his power, not their own. With just 300 men, God would deliver Israel. Gideon's doubts were met with God's assurance. The stage was set for a miraculous victory. God's strength is made perfect in weakness. The impossible was about to happen. Israel would remember, the battle belongs to the Lord. Gideon's faith, though small, was enough. God would do the rest. As Judges continues, the heroes grow more flawed, none more so than Samson. Set apart as a Nazirite, Samson was given supernatural strength, but he was ruled by his passions, breaking his vows and making reckless choices. His weakness was his undoing, especially with Delilah, who betrayed him. Samson revealed his secret. His strength left him, captured, blinded and enslaved. He hit rock bottom. In his weakness, Samson finally turned to God. In a final act, he prayed for strength, bringing down the Philistine temple and defeating more enemies in death than in life. Samson's story is a warning about pride and compromise, yet it's also a story of grace. God can bring victory from failure. Even the strongest fall, but God's mercy endures. Samson's end was tragic, but not without redemption. In weakness, he found true strength. God's grace shines brightest in brokenness. The final chapters of Judges are the darkest. The cycle of rescue breaks down, replaced by chaos. There's no foreign oppressor. Israel turns on itself. The refrain echoes. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. Without God as king, there was no moral compass. Idolatry, violence, and civil war tore the nation apart. One story tells of Micah, who made his own idol and priest, corrupting worship. Another tells of a horrific crime in Gibeah, leading to civil war and near destruction of a tribe. The problem was no longer outside, it was in their hearts. Judges ends on a bleak note, a warning of what happens when people abandon God. It's a terrifying picture of humanity without a king. The darkness was complete, but the story wasn't over. Judges ends in darkness, but not without hope. The cycle of sin and rescue reveals God's relentless mercy. Again and again, God sent deliverers to a people who didn't deserve it. He used the flawed, the fearful, the unexpected. God's grace was always bigger than Israel's failure. These stories are not just history, they're a mirror for us. We too need rescue from our cycles of sin. Judges leaves us longing for a true king, a deliverer who can break the cycle for good. The darkness points forward to hope, King David and ultimately King Jesus. He's the perfect deliverer, the king who never fails. Judges shows us our need and prepares us for the good news to come. Even in the darkest times, God is at work, weaving redemption. The story ends with longing, but also with the promise of a king who saves. If you enjoyed this journey, make sure to subscribe and share this video with others who might find it meaningful. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or questions. We love hearing from you. And if you want to grow your own YouTube channel, check out the link for Vidico in the description below. It's an amazing tool that can help you reach new heights. Try Vidic today and see the difference for yourself.